Hello, hello. Thank you for being here. We have an incredible crowd, honestly, a really badass arena, and honestly, headset, stage, I'm feeling a little bit like a Backstreet Boy, honestly. I'm not mad about it, though. So thank you to Moldova DevCon for giving me this opportunity and for giving me a chance to speak about my favorite part of the web, which is web accessibility. So first, while I ramble on about myself for a minute, feel free to jump ahead. You can download the slides from Dropbox and have all the links to all the demos that we'll go over today. Again, my name is Daniel Yuschick. I began my career as a designer and have been working as a front-end developer for the past 15 or so years. To give you an idea, my first job was as a webmaster. That's how old I am. So I've taken that background in design and this passion for accessibility, UI, and UX, and I've moved that into my current position, which is as lead design systems developer at SAP. So during this 15 years career, I've worked a lot of jobs. It's kind of what developers do. We bounce around a lot. And in my experience of having to advocate for accessibility, I've always had to break it down in a few different ways. And it's going to be what we cover today. First, we're going to relate to accessibility. We're going to learn how we all benefit from accessibility, whether we're really even aware of it or not. Then we're going to cover the 4 core principles of accessibility. And then we're going to learn how we can use those principles into our approaches towards accessibility. My goal for this talk is to not make your website AAA compliant. My goal for this talk is to find ways for you to approach your design and your development work in ways that positively impact the accessibility of your product, but in ways that sort of feel natural, like you're not really doing anything extra, just ways to approach your work that raise that floor of compliance of accessibility. So no time like the present. I think we can just get into it. Does that all sound good to y'all? Does that sound good? Good enough-ish, good enough-ish. All right. First thing we're going to cover today, and if there's only one key point that you take away from my talk, it's that accessible design is good design. How I like to relate to this are with crosswalks, the everyday item of crosswalks. You see, you have iconography to communicate when you should cross or when you should wait. Right? You might have a little icon of a stick figure just hanging out, chilling. Right? And then when it's safe to cross, you got a little walking icon. Maybe it's animated, right? And then those icons are also going to be color-coded. When you should wait, probably red. When you can cross, probably green, sometimes white. And I noticed here, you got the countdowns as well. And the countdowns are also color-coded, and that's pretty helpful as well. But another feature of some crosswalks that I really enjoy are the audio cues. So in Helsinki, where I live, despite the accent, we have audio indicators where if you should wait, you have one slow, inconsistent beep. Just make maybe one beep every 5 seconds. But then when it's safe to cross, that beeping speeds up like 5 times, and you can hear it the whole time that you cross the street. So these features may have been designed and developed and implemented for the sake of accessibility, so that we can benefit those who may have mobility issues, vision impairments, hearing impairments. But let's take a second to think about maybe a parent teaching their child how to cross the street safely. That parent is going to have their child watch the crosswalk, wait for it to change before they actually cross the street safely. Or let's get out of hypotheticals. Let's give an example of myself. I walk up to a crosswalk, I have to wait. What's the first thing I do? Pull out my phone. Start scrolling whatever, I don't know, basketball highlights, whatever news. And then I'm not paying attention to the world around me. Until that audio cue changes. And then I look up from my phone, and I have to start crossing the street before I get in the way, start causing a scene. Ain't nobody want that, right? So even though those features of color-coded icons, countdowns, audio cues, even though those were designed for accessibility purposes, they benefit everybody the same way. But crosswalks are in the physical world. We're mostly all developers. We don't live in the physical world. We live in the digital one. So let's compare this to something else. With this, I like to compare it to responsive design. They share the same similarities, the same benefits, the same amount of work. Yet we really only pay attention to one. First, if you want to make a product responsive, it's probably going to take cross-team collaboration. I know you have like your own portfolios, you've made it responsive yourself, ta-da. But in large company environments, you're probably not going to be making the project responsive yourself. And accessibility is the same way. It's going to take multiple teams to buy in and to commit to the work to be able to make that product accessible. And then for as long as you're working on that product, editing code, adding new features, you have to make sure that that new work is also responsive. Just as well as you need to make sure that it's also accessible. And if you have a fully responsive website, it doesn't matter that there is a new iPhone released, because your responsive website will automatically adapt to whatever that new screen size and resolution are. Accessibility, again, is the same way. If you have a standards-compliant semantic product, it doesn't matter if there's a new version of VoiceOver, of TalkBack, or any other assistive technology, you're giving yourself the best possibility to be broadly supported for everybody. But again, lots of experience. You always have to make a business case, because apparently people is not a business case. Who knew? And you can look at responsive design and accessibility as directly impacting the sales and conversions of your product. If I'm trying to buy a pair of shoes on my phone, but I can't check out because I have to scroll all around and I can't enter my details correctly, I'm going to go to a website where I can buy those shoes, where the site is responsive, long before I get up off the couch, pause Netflix, go into the next room, open the laptop, forgot my password, reset password, sign back in. It's not happening. And accessible design is the same thing. If I'm trying to buy that same pair of shoes with my screen reader, but I can't, I'm going to go to a website where I can do that versus changing my entire context, because some people don't have the luxury of being able to change their context. And this really does bring me to our final point, which is people have an expectation that their needs will be met. I'm sure there's a quote from Freud somewhere about people expect to be able to do what they need to do the way they need to do it. And if we have properly responsive websites and properly accessible websites, products, then we can meet those expectations. Yet, products really only ever care about responsive design. If we're starting a new feature, joining a new company, anything like that, like I've never stepped into a kickoff where accessibility was discussed. Now, to be fair, responsive design really wasn't discussed either, because it's 2024. Of course, everything we're building is going to be responsive. We don't even have to talk about it anymore. So I'm here advocating for accessibility to be considered the same way as responsive design. But I'm looking at that list, and I'm just thinking, I want it that way. So tell me why. Why is accessibility not held to the same standard or the same regard as responsive design, even though we've just covered all the similarities? And I believe this boils down to one key point. And that is that web accessibility is fundamentally misunderstood. Now, this is a graphic from Microsoft's Inclusive Design course. And I think it beautifully illustrates this misconception that a lot of us have. In my experience talking with management about accessibility, the general perception that they have is just of this permanent column on the list. We're thinking of someone who may be fully immobile, fully blind, fully deaf. We're thinking of this far end of the spectrum. But if you will all indulge me for a moment, show of hands, who's ever broken a bone? Oh, that's more than I was expecting. First time in Moldova, and we've got ourselves a clumsy country. I love it. I say it with love. I say it with love. I'm with my people. Back in the day, I broke my finger. Big deal, boo-hoo. But it's my main clicking mouse finger. And I quickly learned how difficult it is to use your mouse with the next two fingers. I learned how tough it is to use a right-handed mouse with a left hand. So I had to start navigating my day-to-day life on the web with my keyboard. And I found out which websites and which products do support keyboard functionality. Now, for the websites that did support keyboard navigation and keyboard functionality, did they picture me when they built that functionality? In that context, would I have considered myself to be disabled? I have a broken knuckle, that's it. Am I disabled? I wouldn't consider myself to be, but according to this image, I was temporarily disabled. So the accessibility decisions that were made for perhaps the permanent column on this list benefited the temporarily disabled as well, just as much. And now if you think of that parent who's teaching their child how to cross a street, they may have them propped up on their hip one day, ordering groceries with their keyboard with their left hand. They're going to need that keyboard navigation situationally just as much as anyone else. So when we make accessible decisions and we build products that are accessible, we're benefiting everybody. Everybody benefits when we're creating accessible experiences. So let's look at accessibility. Let's break down its 4 core principles to get a better understanding of kind of what this is made up of. Now, the first point here is perceivable. This mostly boils down to communicating in layers. Always think about crosswalks. Crosswalks communicate with iconography, colors, numbers, audio. We're communicating the same information in layers. We can also think about images with alt text. Some people may be able to see and understand the context of this image. Some people might not. So they use the alt text to see and understand the context of that image. Next, we have operable. And this mostly boils down to, if you build functionality that supports a mouse, let's also support other input devices like keyboards. Then the last 2 we're going to do pretty quickly. First one is understandable. This is making sure that we're defining content languages for our products and creating a consistent UI experience. And then robust, making sure that we're shipping standards compliant semantic HTML to the client at the end of the day to ensure we have the broadest amount of support that we can. So those are pretty broad, a little bit generic. I think we can start applying those to our approaches to how we can develop with accessibility in mind, hopefully in a way that feels natural. We have a few demos we're going to look at here. And the first is going to be that markup is functional, not visual. Now, I like to exemplify this one with the classic back button. I mean, it often looks like a button. We call it a button. But what is the actual function of this component? And that is to navigate from one location to the next. I guess previous. But we're navigating from one place to the next, which sounds a lot more like the function of an anchor tag or a link. So we're going to take a look at this demo here. And we have 3 of the same back buttons created. In this first example, we're using an anchor tag. And then in the second example, using a button tag. And the third example, we're using a div tag. We're going to ignore that one. Just don't do that. So in the anchor tag example, you'll see that if we hover over the element, we get a little URL preview in the bottom corner. If we think about phishing attacks and emails, this is one way that we can check to make sure that we're actually linking to the place we think. But then also, if we right-click on this element, we get this context menu with all of this link-specific functionality, like open link in a new tab, copy the link address, all these good things. If you hold Command and click on the link, you can open it up in a new tab automatically. But the anchor is also interactive by default, so you get the focus states and the keyboard navigation out of the box. It's all there. So we're writing functional markup for this element. Now, we could write visual markup and have a button element, where we also get keyboard support and focus states, but we no longer get the URL preview in the bottom corner. And yeah, if we right-click on it, we're also not going to get any context-specific functionality for this item. We lose out on all the link-specific functionality because we've written our content relative to how the element looks, frankly, and how we call it, over how it actually functions. So we want to make sure that whenever we're developing new components and developing new features, that we're writing this markup relative to how the component functions, not how it looks. But I hear you already. What about this? What about this? What about this? It depends. There are instances where you will not be able to write the functional markup to achieve the design. Designers are incredibly creative. They convey complex content and information in very beautiful ways. The progress bar is one way of doing this. Now, we have the native HTML progress element, but at least to my knowledge, I don't think we can actually use that element to create a radial progress bar. Horizontal, great, we got that. Vertical, yep, we can do that too. Radial, not so much. So a lot of times we turn to different divs and SVGs, perhaps. So we're going to look at this demo here as well. And this is where I get to stop talking for a second, because this demo uses VoiceOver on Mac, a screen reader, to communicate how these progress bars are communicated to people using screen readers. In the first example, we're just building our progress bar with a couple divs. They're kind of styled, whatever, but that's it. Just visual communication with some divs. Then in the second example, we're using perceivable markup, which in this case is ARIA markup. Now, the best ARIA is no ARIA, but in some settings is what we need. And in this case, we're using the same divs as the first example, but we're going to use ARIA markup to communicate the actual role and purpose and values of this element. And then lastly, we have the native HTML progress element, and we'll be able to compare and contrast how clearly we communicate to people using screen readers between the second and third demos. So I'm going to give this a play, and let's take a listen together.
Heading level 2, 3 items, without perceivable ARIA markup, 25%, 25%. Heading level 2, 3 items, with perceivable ARIA markup, current level 50% progress indicator, current level 50% progress indicator. Heading level 2, 3 items, with functional progress element markup, current level 75% progress indicator. You are currently on a progress indicator.
And there we go. We got 3 examples of the same progress bar, but we got 3 different communication styles. In the first one, all we heard was 25%. We're not even selecting the progress bars. We're communicating the text node itself. So let's say you maybe have some type of color blindness and visual impairment, and you can't tell the difference between the progress part of the circle and the not progress part of the circle. Or let's say you're using screen magnification software, and you're zoomed into a whole other part of the website, and you can no longer see the context of this progress bar. If you just close your eyes and listen to 25%, what does that mean? What is the context of 25%? And unless you can see visually this progress bar, you're not going to know. So in the second example, we use ARIA markup to create that perceivable layer of communication to provide context. 50% current level progress indicator. If we're playing a game and we're leveling up our characters, we understand whether we see this progress bar or not, that we are 50% progressed through the current level. And then we compare that to the native HTML progress element, and here that we create a very comparable experience in both cases. So you want to write markup that is functional for the element that you're building. But if you can't write functional markup to meet the needs of the design, that is going to be a cue that you might need to use perceivable ARIA markup to create that extra layer of communication. And that is our first key. And we're going to look at the next key, which is markup must also communicate just as clearly as our design. And we have a pretty common demo here as well. using the classic navigation bar pattern. Right? We have a list of links, a list of our pages, and we just kind of change the background color of the page that we're currently on. Maybe we'll add an underline if we feel a little spicy, but it's mostly just a change of a background color. So we're going to listen to this demo as well because, again, we're only using visual communication to state which page we're currently on. We're just changing the background color of, in this case, the second link to say, this is the page you're currently on. Then in the second example, we're going to be using perceivable ARIA markup, in this case, an attribute called ARIA current, to, again, communicate in markup the same information that our design is communicating. So let's take a listen to this demo as well.
Heading level 2, 2 items. Without ARIA current equals page. Navigation. List 4 items. Link. Home. Link. Products. Navigation. Heading level 2, 2 items. With ARIA current equals page. Navigation. List 4 items. Link. Home. Current page. Link. Products. 2 of 4.
Current page, link, products. Now again, you close your eyes, you listen to that demo, you understand the context of where you are in that second example, because we're writing markup that communicates just as clearly as our design. We want to make sure we're communicating in layers, that we're writing markup that is just as communicable and explicit as our design as well. So that was a pretty straightforward key, which brings us to our last key, which is that if a mouse can do it, so must a keyboard. Now, we've all come across some like complex UI interactions before where we're like sorting a list, we're maybe resizing a frame inside of a window, kind of functionality that we sort of take for granted doing it with our mouse all the time until you have to use it with something else. So we have a demo here of a list sort component. And I'm going to give a shout out to Atlassian's design system because they're the ones that originally showed me how you can do such a complex interaction in such a clear, concise way for keyboard navigation. So we're going to listen to this demo. And it's a little bit of a longer one, but I hope it blows your mind just as much as it blew mine.
Link. Parks and Recreation. List 5 items. Description. Press spacebar to grab and the arrow keys to reorder. Link. Seinfeld. Link. The Office. The Office grabbed. Current position in list 3 of 5. The Office. New position in list 2 of 5. The Office. New position in list 1 of 5. The Office dropped. Final position in list 1 of 5.
That blew my mind the first time I heard that. How we can communicate with just a couple visually hidden divs and dynamically generated content to communicate the instructions on how to manage and navigate this list, as well as the current state and end result of this list. Also, anyone have an argument against The Office being #1 on this list? Or are we all in just objective agreement? Okay, cool. Wow, the fight. All right. So, shout out to Atlassian's design system because I feel like this exemplifies how we can actually take a little bit of time and create an experience for everybody, not just people using a mouse. Now, we do have a quick recap. You can read the points if you download the slides. Great. I actually just want to go a little rogue for a second here. We're all kind of developers or in some capacity working in IT, and we're always talking about and thinking about users. We need more users. What are our users doing? But we're not building software for users. We're building software for people. People use our software. So when we stop saying users, we can start bringing a little bit of empathy into our digital world. And we can create experiences for people because people use our software. Thank you.
This was good.
Thank you.
This was
I had to
really
live up to some expectations.
And you were having fun with it.
Always. It's accessibility.
Right. Let's see how many designers we have in the house. Designers, can you give a shout? What are like 3 of
Yeah,
us?
yeah.
Woohoo! Good stuff. Good stuff. We see ya. We see ya. I have a question that's not only very technically hard, but it's also controversial. I think you can handle it. Is accessibility the responsibility of the designer or the developer?
Neither. It's the responsibility of the entire organization. You need buy-in from top down. Designers can contribute to that. Developers can contribute to that. QA can contribute to that. PMs can write user stories for that. It's an entire organization approach, but you can't build an accessible product by yourself as a dev. You can't design an accessible product by yourself as a designer. It takes full buy-in from everyone.
This is excellent. I 100% agree with you. So we have a few more questions on Telegram. Again, Igor Putina has some excellent questions. But let's answer the one from Alex M. Can you share a few practical things to set up at the start of a greenfield project to nudge developers, designers about accessibility?
That's a great question, Alex. What I would suggest for that would be a few things. First, you have Axe DevTools for Chrome and Firefox. You can have these developer extensions in your browser that you'll be able to run periodic audits while you're developing against localhost, if so be. You can do checks for things like, does your input fields have labels? Do your images have alt text? You can automate those things, as well as automating keyboard like order. You can actually see the system tab through your entire product, count the steps, see if it's a logical flow. You can automate all that stuff. So DevTools within the browser. And then you can have Axe linter as well if you're using VS Code. And you can lint for these low-hanging fruit items as well, and it kind of keeps you honest a little bit. So linters, DevTools in the browser, and if you want to get fancy with it, you can also find some CI integrations as well to do those same checks for those low-hanging fruits.
Nice. We have one more question, time for one more question. Is it true too much animation or motion in a design, parallax effects, such, can make some people feel sick, and therefore makes the design less accessible? So what other such example of overdoing it with trying to make a cool UI?
Yeah. Man, now I wish I used that demo, because I do have a motion demo. Yes, it is true that too much motion and too much flashing and animation can create a type of sickness. It can, in extreme cases, lead to seizures, but it can be very unsettling and very uncomfortable for a lot of people. So what I would suggest for this is at your operating system level, you can enable a feature called reduced motion, and that will reduce all the motion within your actual UI. So if you think about the Genie effects in Mac, you can minimize those. And then using CSS, you can actually plug into that setting and create experiences that reduces the amount of motion and flickering on the page. And ideally, you're creating and designing an experience that meets that need. It doesn't just sort of half-ass the current UI in a static way. You can support that feature, and you can build a UI to accommodate that in a very nice, pleasing way.